Hey guys, my name's Doug, and I teach a young married couples class. Let me rephrase that. I was a young married couples class teacher, but I've been doing it so long we're now the old married couples class, one of them. So I'm doing lesson 13 for you guys, which will be February 25th. So we got some good text to cover today. This is a story that I think everybody's probably familiar with. It's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you focus on what a lot of people like to focus on with that story, um, that's understandable given our times, given our culture. But I think if you just settle there, I think you're missing some really valuable lessons for us as Christians. So, without further ado, let's kind of get into it. So, for our class, what I always like to do is give a bit of a review, particularly when we're doing these narratives, like through Genesis. These history lessons are really valuable for us, and I like to kind of back up and every week sort of give a review so that it begins to stick in people's mind about what the real story is about. We always like to say, the there's not really a New Testament and Old Testament in the Bible. It's all one story. It's all the story of man's depravity and God's reconciliation for us. And that's how we kind of approach this. So, going back to the beginning of the lessons that we've been working on, all the way back to creation. We've gone through three rebellions. We've gone through the fall, we've gone through the Genesis 6 rebellion, and then we've gone through the Tower of Babel. And that's a long story. And when you read it, we sort of miss, because we don't maybe all speak Hebrew. You sort of miss what's written there for us. And we begin with a lot of language, particularly leading up to the Tower of Babel, of let us build a tower. Let us, we will not surely, because God said this, we will not surely. There's a lot of that. And then enters the picture where we are now, with a picture of a guy named Abraham, Abram at this point still. And with Abram, God's language changes, and we begin to hear a lot of "I will." We think that Moses was kind of the first one that heard the old "I am" statement, but it was Abraham. God talked to Abram and said, "I am, I will do this." So we see this shift. We see a shift of basically God giving man a long leash, and man just screwing it up royally. And then with Abram, we begin to see the picture of reconciliation going forward, so that it's all going to culminate with one man 2,000 years ago in the form of Jesus, and that's the story that we're on. So with that, let's kind of back up. So we've gone through the Tower of Babel, we've gone through that rebellion, and we know what happened there. And then we get the story of this man named Abram, called out of Ur of the Chaldees. This is a pagan. Abram he brought his family, his nephew Lot, his dad, Terah. They went into first they went to Haran. They stayed there for about 5 years after God called them, and then they ended up in the Promised Land about 5 years after they set out of Ur of the Chaldees. Abram is a lot like a lot of us, in that it's with Abram's faith, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I think we can probably all identify with that really well. I know certainly my journey of faith often resembles that. So the thing about Abram, though, is we sort of get to be voyeurs in the soap opera of his life, and boy, he had quite a life. A lot of those patriarchs, man, they were, as we like to say in our class, they were a bunch of wild rednecks, and God loved them still, And God even said about Abram that he is righteous. Why is Abram righteous? Because God said he was righteous. Why? We later find out that it was because he believed. When God told him something, he believed, and God credited that to him as righteousness. So, I guess that's kind of where I'm probably going to start with our class. Is that point one is this: our journey of faith looks a lot like Abraham's. It's 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. Abram answered God's call from a pagan land. Great job. He took about 5 years to get there with a long layover in Haran. Probably could have got on the horse a little bit quicker than that. From there, he journeyed into the Promised Land. We read that when he went in there, he began building altars to the Lord wherever he went. That's great. From that point, though, famine hits, and he hightails it to Egypt, where he, right out of the gate, trades his wife for safety, which apparently is going to become a bit of a habit for Abraham. He's going to do it again with Abimelech. From that point, he ends up back in the promised land, and his nephew Lot, who we're going to talk a little bit about here directly, Lot is attacked and carried off, and Abram mounts up his guys. He got 318 well-trained men under him, and he goes out and he rescues Lot. And when he comes back, he runs across this guy named Melchizedek, and we did the lesson already about Melchizedek and kind of representing the priesthood that Jesus will sort of reinstitute, or did. And Abram has the fortitude to turn down a hefty amount of ransom or loot. And his reasoning was that so no one could say that anyone but God blessed me. And so there's one of those steps forward, you know. And then we take a step back. He and Sarah get way ahead of God's plan, and they end up accidentally creating an entire nation of enemies of God's people. So there's a step back. But again, just like you and I, because he believed, God credited it to them as righteousness. So Abram is blessed, and he becomes increasingly wealthy along with his nephew Lot. They end up with so many servants and cattle, they have to separate. And as you know the story, Lot gets first pick. Abraham gave him first pick. And what did Lot choose? He chose the fertile plain, but it was down there next to these towns, Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's where he went. And Abram took his family, took Sarai, and they headed for the hill country. So that's kind of where the story picks up today. We're going to pick up with the story in Sodom and Gomorrah. What we learn about Sodom and Gomorrah is these are some of the most wicked cities on the planet. They are engaging in despicable behavior. And Lot, who is a righteous guy too, kind of settles in with it. And there's a picture there for us in this world that we live in, and how do we view the world we live in. So I guess point 2 that I'm going to bring up with our class is this. God. We like to think of God as a God of bringing people together, and he does. He brings Christians together. But the real story is God is a God who continually separates people and sanctifies. He separates and he sanctifies. He's already done it with Noah, where he destroyed the entire world and started over with one guy. He's done it with now Abram, where he's called this guy out of Ur of the Chaldees, and starting with one guy and building this nation. It originally started with Adam. You know, I mean, it starts with one guy, and that's kind of what the picture of what he's doing looks like. So we've seen this picture of God, you know, kind of separating out and sanctifying and starting with one person and building from there, and going back to when the boat landed and Noah got off of it, what were God's instructions to he and his family? It was to spread out and repopulate the earth. What does mankind do? They clump up in cities, and they are in one particular city, and they try to overthrow God. But we find out that God's plans are always superior to man's plans, and they will not be thwarted. So after Babel, he again separates out from the rest, and he puts one man on a journey of sanctification, and that's where we are. So as Lot and Abram are separating, and Lot finds his way down to the plains where Sodom and Gomorrah are located, and Abram goes to the mountains, Lot's in the middle of this stuff, and he doesn't participate in the sin of the cities. In fact, we find out he was actually really grieved by their sin. But when Sodom and Gomorrah become faced with destruction, Lot has a hard time letting go. And it ends up having disastrous consequences for his family. And I think there's a picture there for us. I think that's a good discussion point if you want to talk to your class about it, is that there's an old Jim Reeves song, and it's called "This World Is Not My Home." And we kind of reference that a lot in our class too, that this world is not our home. We're here, but our home's in heaven. And Lot kind of got away from that principle, and he kind of forgot about that. And he ended up in the midst of some behavior that was very challenging. So that's my third point that I'd probably bring up with my class, and it's that this world is not our home. Sodom and Gomorrah should not have been Lot's home, but he found friends there. He found son-in-laws even. But look what God did by way of the angels for Lot. They tried to help him get them out, and they thought it was all a joke. In fact, in Hebrew, as these son-in-laws laughed at him for trying to get him out, it was the same word that was used when Sarah laughed when God told her, or the angels told her, that she was going to bear a child. She laughed. She thought it was ridiculous. So, going back to Lot. So when Lot first left Abraham, he was just a shepherd on the plains near these cities. But by now, when we catch up in the story in Genesis 19 here, we read that he's a full-fledged member of the community. He's got a spot at the city gate. So he just kind of chose to move closer and closer to sin. And he let his guard down, and it put his family in jeopardy. And I think there's, particularly for the men here in our church and in our community, there's a lesson there. When you let your guard down and you just inch closer and closer to sin, disaster's on the horizon. Lot enjoyed his life in Sodom and Gomorrah. He loved his life there enough that he struggled to let it go. And the same thing can happen to us when we settle into a situation that's spiritually compromised. But here's the beautiful part of the story. It's Abraham. Abraham went to God and he pleaded with God when he knew of God's plans that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. His first thought was my family there, the ones I love, and he went and he spoke to God on Lot's behalf. And that's a narrative that gives us a picture of God's plan for us. It's a high priest interceding on our behalf to pull us out of a wicked world that's destined for destruction. So those are kind of going to be my 3 points, talking about the fact that we all have a journey that looks a lot like Abraham's. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That God is a God who continually separates and sanctifies. And then ultimately this world is not our home. So there's a few questions here, a few things I wanted to kind of talk about. If you like to discuss, if you're a class that does a lot of discussion, here's a question for your class. Why did Lot respond to the angels of the Lord the way he did? Whenever they first told him, we're going to move out, we got to get you out of here, we're going to destroy the town, his response was, no. Why do you think he responded that way? And was it unrighteous to do so? So, left to my own devices, I would probably come up with a different conclusion than what actually the truth is. And luckily, we have the rest of the Bible to interpret it for us. Here's what Peter says. This is in 2 Peter. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, here's our story, to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And then verse 7, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day to day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the ungodly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. See, Lot was a righteous man, but he settled into a wicked world. And even though he hated what those men were doing, he was very nearly swept away with them. So thank God for Abraham for interceding on his behalf. So what about us? What does that mean for us? Well, this is out of Luke 17. Here's what Jesus says about it. Luke 17, verse 22. And he said to the disciples, the days are coming when you will desire to see one of the days of Son of Man, and you will not see it. And they will say to you, look there, or look here. Do not go out and follow them. For as lightning flashes and lights up the sky from one side to the other, so will the Son of Man be in his day. But first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking and marrying and being given in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away, and likewise, let the one who is on the field not turn back. And remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. And I think that's probably a discussion point that we'll bring up. What is Jesus talking about whenever he says that? Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. A couple other points that we'll probably, going back to the scripture in verse 8, there's a point we'll probably pull out of there, and it's that as the angels came into Sodom and Gomorrah, they were beset upon by the men of the city. And just an interesting point that the custom of hospitality was so strong with Lot that he was willing to give up his daughter's purity to fulfill his duty as a host and protect the guest. But you find out that it's actually the guests who are protecting Lot. In verse 9, and I think this one applies to a lot of us as well. In verse 9, when Lot tries to put a stop to their shenanigans, the men of the city show that they view him as just a holier-than-thou outsider. If you've ever had that happen to you, people, it's real easy for us to fall into comfort with our friends of this world and overlook behavior. And then when we speak up and say something, we're just a holier than thou Christian, and we've got to be able to stand against that. Verse 12, the angels go to Lot and they say, "Do you have anybody else in this city that you want to save? Sons-in-laws, whoever." And I think that's a good reminder that God cares about the same people that you care about. He cares about this world. And the story is not about vengeance, it's about justice and judgment. We like to overlook that part of the story a lot of times. So, going on to verse 16, you find out that the angels have urged Lot to leave over the course of a day and a night, but then there's a really sad verse 16, and it says, "But he lingered." So how do you live in this world without lingering? How do you live in this world without becoming of the world? And I think that's a good opportunity for discussion with your classes, to talk to one another about, what do we do? We're supposed to live in this world, and we're supposed to be a light to this world, but this world is so dark and it's so evil. How do we live in it without becoming part of it? I don't have any answers for you, right here. That's for your class to kind of discuss. So, and in verse 16b, twice in this little narrative here and back in verse 10, the angels literally take them by the hand and pull them from danger. An interesting question to talk about in your class is, has God ever had to grab you by your hand and literally pull you from danger, or pull you away from something meant for destruction? Verse 22, as all this goes on and Lot finally flees with his family, they run out and take shelter in a little town, and the little town ends up having its name changed to Zoar. And it's a funny little story because Lot says, "Can I go there?" It's just an insignificant little town, and it becomes Zoar, which actually means insignificant. So that's quite a legacy for a town. And then finally, I think this is something that will maybe generate a lot of discussion, and these are not questions you have to answer, right or wrong. It's just things to generate discussion. But it's this: what was so wrong with Lot's wife looking back? Doesn't turning her into a pillar of salt seem a bit excessive? I've thought about that a lot, and I think that's something that would be interesting to talk to your class about. And my answer that I always come back to is this: I don't know why God did what he did, but I know it was just. So that kind of closes the book on our lesson from Lifeway. That was the last of the lessons in this book. I think we'll have another book started after that. So I appreciate you guys, and enjoy your classes. Thank you.